Dr. Kethavar had dissected the cardiovascular systems of 47 different species across the known galaxy, and none of them had ever personally offended him before. The human lay on the bioscanner with the sort of relaxed indifference typically reserved for sunbathing, occasionally humming what she claimed was something called elevator music. Her vital signs displayed across the holographic readouts in neat, orderly waves, except for the parts where reality seemed to take a coffee break. "Run the temporal calibration again," Kethavar muttered to his assistant, a young Zilithian whose gill slits fluttered nervously whenever the instrument started screaming. "Sir, I've run it 6 times. The chronometers are functioning within normal parameters." "Then explain to me why there are gaps." The human, who went by Quinn and had introduced herself by asking if they served snacks during vivisection, craned her neck to peer at the displays. "Oh, those little blank spots? Yeah, that's probably just my heart doing its thing." Kethavar's secondary eyes swiveled toward her, while his primary ones remained fixed on the data. In his 30 years of xenobiology, he'd learned that subjects who acted unconcerned about their own biological anomalies were usually either lying or about to explode. Sometimes both. "Hearts don't create temporal voids," he said with the patience of someone explaining gravity to a particularly dense asteroid. "Mine apparently does." Quinn shrugged, causing the bioscanner to recalibrate frantically. "Look, I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure that's just how heartbeats work. You know, lub-dub, pause, lub-dub, pause. The pause is kind of the point." "There is no pause in cardiac cycles," Kethavar's assistant chimed in, consulting his datapad. "The slight delay between contractions is measured in milliseconds and represents electrical reset periods in the cardiac muscle tissue." "Right, but what about the space between the milliseconds?" The Zilithian's gills stopped fluttering entirely. In his species, this was roughly equivalent to a human's jaw dropping to the floor and taking up permanent residence there. Kethavar activated a new scanner, this one designed to measure temporal flow at the subatomic level. The readout showed the same impossible pattern. Perfectly normal biological processes interrupted by moments where time itself seemed to skip. Not slow down, not speed up, just cease to exist for infinitesimally brief periods. Over 97% of viewers here are watching without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the journey. Every click helps us grow stronger, and you'll never miss the next epic story. "This is unprecedented," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "Biological organisms don't interact with space-time mechanics. That's elementary physics." "Maybe your elementary physics needs to repeat a grade," Quinn suggested helpfully. The scanner began emitting a high-pitched whine that usually indicated either a breakthrough discovery or imminent equipment failure. In Kethavar's experience, the universe had a cruel sense of humor about which one it would be. "Dr. Kethavar," his assistant said, voice carefully neutral in the way that meant terrible news was incoming. "The temporal displacement readings are consistent across all measurement frequencies. The gaps appear to be real. Real gaps in time are impossible. Time doesn't have gaps. Time is a fundamental constant of the universe." Quinn sat up on the examination table, causing every sensor in the room to start flashing angry colors. "Okay, but what if it's not? What if what's not? Constant? What if time is more of a suggestion? Like speed limits on the highway. Technically, they're laws, but everyone knows you can go 5 over without getting a ticket." Kethavar felt a migraine developing in his tertiary brain stem. "Time is not a traffic regulation." "Says who?" "Says the fundamental laws of physics." "Yeah, but who wrote those laws?" Quinn hopped down from the table and stretched, apparently unbothered by the fact that she was currently causing several million credits worth of scientific equipment to question its own existence. I mean, it's not like the universe came with an instruction manual. Maybe whoever figured out the rules just never met a human. The Zilithian assistant made a choking sound that might have been laughter or respiratory distress. Sir, should I contact the Department of Temporal Sciences? Absolutely not. Kethvar's voice carried the sharp edge of someone who'd spent too many faculty meetings listening to theoretical physicists explain why everyone else was doing science wrong. This is clearly an equipment malfunction. Temporal Sciences would just waste 6 months writing papers about localized chronoton fluctuations and submit a bill for the privilege. But the readings are wrong. They have to be wrong. Do you know what would happen if organic life forms could manipulate spacetime? The universe would be chaos. Complete, utter chaos. Quinn raised her hand like a student in class. Have you looked around lately? Because I hate to break it to you, but chaos might be the factory setting. Kethvar ignored her and activated another scanner, this one designed to detect quantum-level temporal distortions. The machine hummed to life, its sensors focusing on Quinn's chest cavity with the intensity of a predator stalking prey. The readout showed the same impossible pattern. Run a full spectrum analysis, he ordered. Check for exotic matter, tachyon emissions, chronoton particles, anything that could explain localized temporal distortion. Sir, the subject would need to be carrying a significant amount of exotic matter to create these effects. Several kilograms, at minimum. How much do you weigh? Kethvar asked Quinn. 140 on a good day, but that includes my lucky socks. Lucky socks? They've got little clocks on them. Seemed appropriate for a time-related medical exam. The assistant's datapad beeped. Exotic matter readings are negative, sir. No unusual energy signatures. Detected. No evidence of artificial temporal manipulation devices. Kethvar stared at the displays, watching the gaps in time flicker past like missing frames in an old film reel. Each void lasted exactly the same duration. Or rather, the same lack of duration. They appeared with the regularity of a metronome, perfectly synchronized with Quinn's heartbeat. This is impossible, he said finally. Yeah, you keep saying that. Quinn examined her fingernails with the sort of casual interest usually reserved for weather reports. But here's a thought. What if impossible is just another word for stuff you haven't figured out yet? That's not how science works. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it kind of looks like you're staring at a bunch of data that proves your science is missing something pretty important. The bioscanner chose that moment to emit a sound, like a dying whale, followed by a cascade of error messages that painted the holographic display in various shades of alarm. Should I restart the system? The assistant asked. No. Kethvar's voice carried the grim determination of someone who'd just realized his quiet day of routine xenobiology had become a career-defining crisis. Contact the station commander. Tell them we need to expand the research parameters for this subject. What should I list as the reason? Kethvar looked at Quinn, who was now examining the bioscanner with the sort of polite interest usually reserved for museum exhibits, completely unbothered by the fact that her mere existence was causing a fundamental breakdown in their understanding of reality. Temporal anomaly, he said finally. Biological origin unknown. Potentially unprecedented interaction between organic processes and space-time mechanics. Should I also mention that the subject seems completely unaware of the anomaly? Oh, I'm aware, Quinn said cheerfully. I'm just not surprised. Hearts are weird. Time is weird. Existence is weird. It's weird all the way down. You guys are the ones acting like this is some kind of revelation. Kethvar felt his migraine intensify. You're saying you knew this would happen? I'm saying I know how to be human. You're the ones trying to measure it like it's some kind of machine." Quinn tapped the side of the bioscanner with one finger, causing it to emit a distinctly unhappy beep. "Maybe the real question isn't why my heart creates gaps in time. Maybe it's why yours doesn't." The Zilithian assistant looked between them, gills fluttering in confusion. "Sir, should I still contact the commander?" "Yes," Kethvar said, watching the temporal readouts continue their impossible dance. "And tell them to clear their schedule. Something tells me this is going to take a while." Commander Vexthul had handled exactly 3 career-ending disasters during her tenure as station administrator, and she'd always prided herself on recognizing them before they escalated beyond her pay grade. The message from Laboratory 7 suggested she was about to experience her 4th. "Explain to me again why half the Galactic University's physics department is requesting emergency transport to my research station," she said, reviewing the endless stream of priority communications flooding her terminal. Dr. Kethvar shifted uncomfortably in his chair, all 4 of his hands fidgeting with various pieces of equipment that had stopped working properly since their human subject arrived. "Word may have leaked about our unusual findings." "Word may have leaked?" "I may have sent a preliminary data packet to Dr. Morden at the Institute of Temporal Physics for consultation purposes. Commander Vexthul's species didn't have eyebrows, but if they had, both of hers would have disappeared into her hairline." "You sent raw temporal anomaly data to Morden?" "The same Morden who published 17 papers last year claiming that linear time is a mathematical conspiracy. In hindsight, that may not have been my wisest decision. Through the observation window, they could see Quinn chatting with a cluster of newly arrived researchers who had already managed to set up enough scanning equipment to power a small moon. She appeared to be explaining something with enthusiastic hand gestures, while a Keplerian quantum physicist frantically scribbled notes. "What's she telling them?" Vexthul asked. "Something about lucid dreaming and how 5 minutes in dream time can feel like hours of real experience. Dr. Zefton nearly had a breakdown trying to reconcile that with his theories on consciousness-mediated temporal perception. And Dr. Holmer from the Biological Anomaly Department? She's currently running tests to determine if human sleep cycles create larger temporal voids than waking consciousness. Her preliminary hypothesis is that humans might exist in multiple time streams simultaneously." Vexthul watched Quinn demonstrate what she called daydreaming to a bewildered group of Altarian neurobiologists. Their head tentacles were writhing in patterns that typically indicated either extreme fascination or complete mental collapse. "Commander," Kethvar continued, "Dr. Yithlon from xenopsychology believes the temporal anomalies might be linked to human imagination. She's documented 17 separate instances where the subject mentioned losing track of time during creative activities." "Losing track of time?" "Apparently, humans have a colloquial expression for subjective temporal experiences that don't align with objective chronometer readings. Dr. Yithalon is convinced this represents evolutionary adaptation to non-linear temporal existence. A new group of researchers entered the laboratory, led by what appeared to be a floating crystalline entity that pulsed with mathematical equations. Commander Vexthul recognized it as Dr. Crystallis, the galaxy's foremost expert on dimensional mechanics and the author of the definitive text on why organic life couldn't possibly interact with higher-order spacetime. "Oh, wonderful," she muttered. "Now we have the Theoretical Physics Authority involved." Dr. Crystallis floated directly toward Quinn, equations flickering faster as it approached. Quinn looked up from her conversation about whether counting sheep actually affected dream duration, and waved at the crystal being with the sort of casual friendliness usually reserved for neighborhood barbecues. "Hi there. You must be here about the time thing, too. Cool math light show, by the way." Dr. Crystallis's equations briefly stopped scrolling entirely, an occurrence that Dr. Kethvar noted had never been documented in scientific literature. Human-designated Quinn? Crystalis's voice resonated like wind chimes in a tornado. Preliminary analysis of your biological temporal interface suggests either a fundamental error in our understanding of space-time mechanics or a previously unknown form of consciousness-mediated reality manipulation. Or maybe you're just overthinking it, Quinn suggested. Sometimes when I'm really focused on something, like reading a good book or listening to music, hours can pass without me noticing. But if I'm bored in a waiting room, 5 minutes feels like forever. Time's kind of stretchy, you know? Dr. Yithlon, the xenopsychologist, made rapid notes on her datapad. Subjective temporal elasticity correlating with cognitive engagement levels. This could indicate voluntary control over personal timeline flow. Voluntary control? Dr. Crystalis pulsed brighter. Are you suggesting humans consciously manipulate temporal mechanics? I'm suggesting time isn't as rigid as you think it is, Quinn replied. Like right now, I'm having this conversation with you, but part of my mind is also thinking about what I had for breakfast. And another part is wondering if that beeping sound means something important. And yet another part is composing a grocery list for when I get home. I'm existing in like 4 different mental time streams simultaneously. The beeping sound, Commander Vexthul noted, was coming from approximately half the scanning equipment in the laboratory. Dr. Holmer looked up from her readings. Commander, we're detecting secondary temporal anomalies. The human's conversation appears to be generating additional chronoton fluctuations. Additional? Each time she describes a subjective temporal experience, the equipment registers corresponding distortions in local spacetime. It's as if her words are somehow manifesting the effects she's describing. Quinn brightened. Oh, that's probably just narrative causality. You know how when you're telling someone about something that happened, you kind of relive it a little bit? Maybe you're picking up on that. Narrative causality is not a recognized scientific principle, Dr. Crystalis protested, though its equations had begun forming distinctly chaotic patterns. Says who? Says the fundamental laws of… Yeah, see, there you go. Again, with the fundamental laws. Who decided they were fundamental? Did someone check with the universe first? Or did a bunch of really smart people just make some educated guesses, and everyone else went along with it? Dr. Zefton, the quantum physicist, raised one of his many appendages. Human Quinn, are you suggesting that scientific laws are arbitrary? I'm suggesting that maybe the universe is bigger and weirder than any of us realize, and maybe instead of trying to force everything into neat little boxes, we should occasionally ask if the boxes are the right size. Commander Vexthul's personal communicator chimed with yet another priority message. She glanced at it and felt her career prospects dim considerably. Dr. Kethvar, I'm now receiving requests for research station access from the Department of Metaphysical Studies, the Institute for Impossible Things, and something called the Society for the Investigation of Inconvenient Truths. The Society for the Investigation of Inconvenient Truths? Apparently, they specialize in phenomena that mainstream science prefers to ignore. Their research director is particularly excited about what they're calling proof that consciousness predates physical reality. Through the observation window, they watched Quinn attempt to explain the concept of gut feelings to a group of researchers whose species had evolved beyond intuitive reasoning approximately 3 million years ago. The discussion appeared to be causing several of them to question everything they thought they knew about decision-making processes. Commander, Dr. Holmer called out, I'm reading massive temporal distortions across the entire laboratory. It's as if the human's presence is causing localized reality fluctuations. Localized reality fluctuations. Every time she mentions a subjective experience, emotions, dreams, hunches, memories, our instruments detect corresponding changes in space-time density. It's like she's unconsciously editing the fundamental structure of existence just by talking about her inner life. Quinn overheard and looked apologetic. Sorry, I can try to be less Me, if that would help? Please don't, Dr. Ythlon said quickly. This is the most significant breakthrough in consciousness studies in the last 1,000 years. We're finally observing direct evidence of the mind-matter interface that theoretical xenopsychology has been postulating for centuries. Dr. Crystalis floated closer to Commander Vex Thule, equations dimming to what might have been a whisper. Commander, I believe we need to expand this investigation considerably. The implications of consciousness-mediated temporal mechanics could revolutionize our understanding of reality itself. Commander Vex Thule looked at the growing crowd of researchers, the increasingly frantic instrument readings, and the cheerful human who seemed completely unbothered by the fact that her mere existence was causing a galaxy-wide scientific crisis. How many more researchers are requesting access? She asked weakly. Current count is 47 different departments from 23 different worlds, Dr. Kethavar reported, and that number is increasing exponentially. Quinn waved at them through the observation window, apparently having heard every word despite the supposedly soundproof barrier. Don't worry, she called out cheerfully. I've got nowhere else to be. We can take all the time we need. Every chronometer in the room briefly stopped ticking. 3 days into what the Galactic academic community had begun calling the Quinn Incident, the research station resembled less a scientific facility and more a philosophical battlefield littered with the smoking remains of theoretical frameworks. Professor Velnash of the Rigidian Institute for Absolute Certainty had barricaded herself in Conference Room C with a stack of peer-reviewed papers proving that subjective experience was an evolutionary dead end. Across the hall, Dr. Thrimdock from the University of Experiential Reality had constructed what he called a consciousness amplification chamber out of meditation cushions and crystalline resonators, insisting that the only way to understand Quinn's abilities was to achieve similar states of temporal awareness. This is getting out of hand, Commander Vex Thule observed, watching through security feeds as a heated debate between 12 different schools of thought devolved into what appeared to be academic interpretive dance. Dr. Kethavar, whose initial discovery had sparked this intellectual apocalypse, looked like someone who'd accidentally started a small kitchen fire and discovered it had burned down 3 star systems. The consciousness determinists are now claiming that Quinn proves awareness creates reality retroactively. The Materialist Alliance is countering that her brain chemistry must be altering local quantum fields through unknown mechanisms. And the temporal absolutists? They've declared the entire situation a hoax and are demanding we prove that time exists at all. Through the main laboratory's observation portal, Quinn sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a small army of scanning devices that hummed and beeped with increasing desperation. She was currently explaining the concept of nostalgia to a group of Vulcarian logicians who had never experienced an emotion that wasn't directly tied to immediate survival needs. So sometimes, she was saying, you smell something random, like old books or rain on concrete, and suddenly you're 8 years old again, sitting in your grandmother's kitchen, feeling completely safe and happy. For just a moment, past and present exist in the same space. The Vulcarians' cranial ridges were glowing in patterns that their species' medical texts described as pre-neural cascade overload. But the past is immutable, one of them managed. It cannot coexist with present reality. Can't it? I mean, where do memories live? They're not in the past anymore. That's gone. They're not exactly in the present. They're about something that isn't happening now. So where are they? Dr. Ythlon, monitoring the exchange from her xenopsychology station, turned to her colleagues with barely contained excitement. She's describing multidimensional consciousness storage. The human mind apparently archives experiences in temporal substrates that exist parallel to linear time. That's impossible, Dr. Crystalis protested. though its mathematical equations had started forming loops that definitely weren't supposed to be geometrically stable. Consciousness cannot create parallel temporal substrates? Why not? The question came from an unexpected source, Dr. Mordoun, the theoretical physicist whose controversial papers had gotten the whole crisis started. He'd arrived that morning and spent hours reviewing data with the sort of grim fascination usually reserved for watching one's own theories catch fire. "I beg your pardon?" Dr. Crystalis pulsed. "Why can't consciousness create temporal substrates? We know consciousness affects quantum observation. We know quantum mechanics interact with space-time geometry. Why is it impossible that sufficiently complex awareness could generate localized temporal effects?" Because that would mean... Dr. Crystalis's equations flickered uncertainly. That would mean consciousness is a fundamental force of nature, not an emergent property of complex matter arrangements. Maybe it is. The laboratory went very, very quiet. Professor Velnash burst out of conference room C, clutching her research papers like a shield. "Absolutely not! Consciousness is an illusion created by neural network complexity. There is no mystical awareness force." "Then explain Quinn," Dr. Mordoun said simply. "Equipment malfunction, measurement error, mass hallucination." Quinn looked up from her conversation with the increasingly distressed Vulcarians. "Hey, Professor Velnash, right? Can I ask you something?" "I suppose," Velnash replied warily. "When you decided to become a scientist, was it because you wanted to prove consciousness doesn't exist? Or because you were curious about how the universe works?" What does that have to do with anything?" "Well, curiosity is a conscious experience, isn't it? You felt wonder. You wanted to understand something, so you chose to dedicate your life to learning. That's consciousness creating effects in the physical world. Your thoughts and feelings led to actions that changed reality." Professor Velnash opened her mouth to object, then closed it again. Quinn continued, addressing the room at large. "You're all conscious beings who became scientists because consciousness, your awareness, curiosity, wonder, desire to understand, motivated you to build instruments and conduct experiments and ask questions. You're literally using consciousness to study consciousness, and somehow you're surprised that it gets weird and recursive?" Dr. Thrimdock emerged from his meditation chamber, looking enlightened in a way that made Commander Vexthul nervous. "She's right. We've been approaching this backwards. We're not observing consciousness from outside. We are consciousness trying to understand itself." "That's circular reasoning," Professor Velnash protested. "Maybe reasoning is circular," Quinn suggested. "Maybe everything is. Maybe that's why my heartbeat creates gaps in your measurements, because I'm aware of being aware, all the way down. It's loops within loops within loops, and the loops exist in the spaces between moments." The Vulcarian logicians made sounds that their translator indicated as existential system failure. Dr. Crystalis floated closer to Quinn, its equations now resembling something that might have been artistic if it weren't so mathematically terrifying. "Human Quinn, are you suggesting that self-awareness creates recursive temporal effects?" "I'm suggesting that maybe asking, 'What am I?' while being the thing that's asking the question is bound to get a little strange." Commander Vexthul's personal communicator exploded with priority alerts. She glanced at the readout and felt the last of her administrative composure crumble. "I'm now receiving research requests from the Department of Circular Logic, the Institute for Paradox Studies, and something called the Council of Beings Who Question Their Own Existence." Dr. Kethvar looked up from his instruments, which had started displaying readings that weren't quite numbers, but weren't quite symbols either. "Commander, the temporal distortions are spreading. Every time Quinn talks about consciousness, reality gets more flexible. The other researchers are starting to generate their own chronoton fluctuations." Through the observation portal, they could see Dr. Thrimdock attempting to measure his own awareness while being aware of measuring it. The resulting feedback loop had created what appeared to be a small pocket of reversed causality. His instruments were displaying results before he activated them. "This is fascinating," Dr. Ythalon announced. "The mere act of conscious beings contemplating consciousness appears to generate reality distortions. It's as if the universe becomes unstable when it tries to observe itself." "Or maybe," Quinn said, overhearing despite the supposedly soundproof barrier, "the universe was always unstable, and we're just the first species weird enough to notice." Professor Velnash sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "If consciousness is fundamental, if awareness shapes reality at the quantum level, then every scientific observation we've ever made has been influenced by the consciousness doing the observing," Dr. Mordun finished. "Objective reality might be a lovely theoretical construct, but actual reality appears to be collaborative." Quinn nodded cheerfully. "Exactly. You guys keep trying to measure me like I'm separate from the universe, but I'm part of it. We all are. When you study me, the universe is studying itself through you studying me, studying the universe, studying itself. No wonder your instruments are confused." Dr. Crystallis's mathematical displays had evolved into something that looked suspiciously like recursive poetry. Commander Vexthul closed her eyes and tried to remember when her biggest problem had been scheduling routine maintenance. "Dr. Kethvar, what's our current count on research requests?" 137 departments from 46 worlds, plus 6 interdimensional entities, and something that claims to be the mathematical concept of infinity. Quinn waved at them through the observation window. "Don't worry, everyone. I think we're getting close to figuring it out. The answer is probably really simple once you stop trying to think about it linearly." Every clock in the station began running backwards for exactly 17 seconds. The breakthrough came not from the increasingly esoteric instruments or the philosophical warfare raging across 12 conference rooms, but from Quinn asking the simplest possible question while Dr. Kethavar was calibrating yet another temporal sensor. "What does it feel like when you think?" Kethavar paused, all 4 hands frozen over his controls. "I beg your pardon?" "Thinking. What's the experience like for you? Not the process, the experience. The moment when an idea appears in your mind." "Ideas don't appear," Kethavar said automatically. "Neural networks process information and generate logical conclusions based on available data." "Okay, but what does that feel like?" Kethavar considered this. "It doesn't feel like anything. It simply occurs." Quinn tilted her head with the expression of someone who'd just discovered a profound and slightly tragic truth. Oh, that explains everything." Dr. Crystallis floated closer, equations brightening with sudden attention. "What explains everything?" "You guys don't live in the gaps." The assembled researchers, now numbering somewhere in the triple digits and representing more species than Commander Vexthul cared to count, exchanged glances that transcended species barriers in their shared confusion. "The gaps between thoughts," Quinn continued, settling into what was apparently going to be her final lecture. "Between heartbeats, between breaths, between one moment and the next. You experience thinking as a continuous process, right? Information flows in, processing occurs, conclusions emerge. Linear and efficient." "As it should be," Professor Velnash said, though her voice carried less conviction than it had 3 days ago. "But humans, we get stuck in the spaces between things. Like, I'll have a thought, and then there's this pause where I'm aware of having had the thought, and then I'm aware of being aware of having had the thought, and somewhere in all that recursion, time kind of hiccups." Dr. Mordun leaned forward intently. You're describing metacognitive loops. I'm describing being human. We don't just think, we think about thinking. We don't just feel, we feel about feeling. We don't just exist, we exist knowing that we exist and wondering what that means. And all of that meta stuff happens in the spaces between the regular stuff. Dr. Yithalon's datapad was recording frantically. Are you saying human consciousness operates in temporal interstices? I'm saying we live there. It's not just where we operate, it's where we exist. The you-ness of you, the part that experiences being you, that's not in the thoughts or the feelings or the sensations. It's in the awareness of thoughts, the observer of feelings, the experiencer of sensations. It's pure consciousness hanging out in the gaps between everything else. The laboratory had gone deadly quiet, except for the increasingly frantic beeping of instruments that were detecting something unprecedented. Dr. Crystalis pulsed dimly. But if consciousness exists in temporal gaps, if awareness operates outside linear time, then maybe consciousness isn't produced by brains, Quinn finished gently. Maybe brains are produced by consciousness. Maybe consciousness is what's there when nothing else is happening, and physical processes are just the exhaust. The implications hit the assembled scientists like a particularly devastating existential meteor. That would mean, Dr. Thrimdock said slowly, that we've been measuring the shadows on the cave wall while the fire that casts them exists in dimensions we can't perceive. Worse, Dr. Mordun added, with the tone of someone watching their life's work spontaneously combust. It would mean consciousness is fundamental, matter is emergent, and every materialist theory we've ever constructed is backwards. Quinn nodded sympathetically. Yeah, that's got a sting. But look on the bright side. You guys can detect the gaps. You can measure them, quantify them, study them. You just can't experience them yourselves. Why not? Kethvar asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Because you evolved to survive. Pure consciousness is terrible for survival. It's slow, inefficient, and makes you forget to eat while you contemplate the nature of existence. Humans are evolutionary weirdos who kept the metacognitive loops instead of optimizing them away. We're the universe's attempt at self-awareness, and it turns out self-awareness is really, really buggy. Commander Vexthul, who had been listening from the observation deck with the growing certainty that her station had become ground zero for the collapse of galactic civilization, finally spoke up. So, the temporal anomalies aren't anomalies, Quinn said cheerfully. They're features. Consciousness existing in the spaces between moments creates gaps in linear time, because consciousness doesn't operate linearly. You guys just built instruments sensitive enough to detect what's always been there. Dr. Crystalis's equations had simplified into something that looked almost like poetry. We've been asking the wrong questions. You've been asking perfectly reasonable questions from the perspective of beings who don't live in temporal interstices, Quinn corrected. It's like, imagine if fish tried to study air. They could measure its density, its composition, its behavior under different conditions, but they could never understand what it feels like to breathe. And we're the fish, Professor Velnash said, with the tone of someone accepting a particularly unwelcome enlightenment. You're the fish. I'm the weird amphibian who can sort of exist in both environments, except one of the environments is consciousness itself, and the other is linear time. Dr. Yithalon looked up from her frantically scribbling datapad. But if humans can access pure consciousness, if you can exist in temporal gaps, what does that mean for the rest of us? Quinn grinned. It means you've got really good instruments and I've got really good gaps. Seems like a perfect partnership for figuring out how the universe actually works. The assembled researchers stared at her with the collective expression of beings who had just discovered that their fundamental assumptions about reality were not merely wrong, but adorably naive. So, Commander Vexthul said finally, what do we do now? Now? Quinn stretched and stood up, casually triggering a cascade of temporal measurements that would probably keep xenobiologists busy for centuries. Now you guys go write some very interesting papers, and I go see if the cafeteria serves anything besides nutrient paste. All this existence explaining has made me hungry. She paused at the laboratory door and looked back at the sea of confused, excited, and mildly traumatized alien faces. Oh, and maybe next time you want to study consciousness, start with the assumption that it might be studying you back. Saves time. Quinn left, humming something she claimed was called elevator music. Behind her, the most brilliant minds in the galaxy stared at their instruments, which were now displaying readings that suggested consciousness was indeed everywhere, everywhen, and thoroughly amused by their previous attempts to measure it. Dr. Kethavar was the first to speak. "I think," he said slowly, "we're going to need bigger instruments." Dr. Crystallis pulsed in what might have been agreement or existential despair. Or, it suggested, we could try learning to live in the gaps ourselves. The chronometers throughout the station suddenly synchronized, began keeping perfect time. And then, just to make a point, all displayed the exact same moment for exactly as long as it took the universe to wink.